Let's take a look at page 2, which begins in Hebrews chapter 4. There's always a big 4 at the beginning of the thing, but that just means the chapter for this instance. So we're not starting in verse 4. We're starting in verse 1. And there's several things in here that I'd like you to, as we go through, that maybe circle it, and that way you can see what got the most attention and what we need to think about here. So let me read the first paragraph here. Therefore, of course, the therefore looks back at the fact that the Israelites did not believe, okay? They would have gone in 40 years earlier into Canaan. That was God's promise to them, but they disobeyed. And when you think about this disobedience to God, you have to, the next step of that backward is unbelief, okay? The reason they disobeyed is because they did not believe. There were two that we know of that believed God when the spies went in, Joshua and Caleb. And the others were afraid that we look like grasshoppers. That's the grasshopper syndrome. Okay, don't let that affect you. Don't see the giants, but see God as greater than all things. So that's the therefore. Okay, don't be like them. And he's going to refer back to them quite a bit in this book. Therefore, let us fear, or your version might say, let us be careful. Okay, while a promise remains. So there's still God's promise of entering his rest. While the promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard did not profit them, because it was, and circle this, united by faith. It was not united by faith in those who had heard. For we who have believed enter that rest, just as he had said, and he's going to quote in Psalms 95 now, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, looking back at the Exodus and so forth, okay? The only way we get into heaven, the only way we can be close to God is believing him. That's it. None of the rituals, none of the other stuff. I mean, there's a reason for them and all of those kind of things. But belief in God, trusting in him, okay? We'll have more to say about that. In fact, it was so important in 1 Samuel 15, it said, Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delights in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. So you want to please God, and you say, well, I'm going to do this for him, or I'm going to give this to him, or I'm going to whatever, okay? That's secondary. Your primary job in this life is to trust God, okay? Is to follow him and to trust him. Now, the first part that we read there was talking about a promise remains. He was talking about both the Jews in that day as well as us today. And it says, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. The Jewish people, a contingent of Jews, believed that since they crucified Christ, and because they did not believe him, that promise no longer remains. People who study with a dispensational point of view that are called amillennialists generally say there's no restoration of Israel. None of that is good anymore. They did their part. Now the church is going to take over. And that's not what I believe that the Bible tells us. It's not too late for the Jews, even today. All right? In Acts chapter 3, if you listen to Peter's preaching, he says, you to the Jews, you denied the Holy One and the just. You desired a murderer to be granted unto you, Barabbas. Remember that? And he's really letting them have it here. You killed the Prince of Life. Now, that's a pretty strong indictment, and they did it, but they therefore did not forfeit everything. when you go to verse 25 in Acts chapter 3, and you listen, it says, "Ye are the sons of the prophets, and the covenant which God made with the fathers unto Abraham, and in thy seed shall all the kindreds of the earth be blessed." So Israel is still on the map. It is in God's economy. Israel is. So when we watch what's going on and what's happened to Israel, no other group of people or nation had ever been taken apart and come together, taken apart and come together. And even today, it was in 1948, they became a nation again. Where were they? They were everywhere. They weren't all in Israel. They were everywhere. And they came together. And, that was a divine providence that happened there. Now, you say, but they still aren't believers as a nation. No, they're not. But Revelation has a lot to talk about that and talk about what's going to happen. So he's basically challenging the Jews. If you recall, we don't know who the author is. He was probably a friend of Peter and Paul, and he certainly was known by the apostles and everything. And they were in a situation where the Romans were going to be coming in, and the Romans were going to take them over, probably wipe them out, take the temple, destroy the temple. Jesus predicted that. He said, not one stone upon another. And that happened in 70 AD. So the temple was destroyed. We don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is anymore. The Raiders of the Lost Ark thinks they know, but we don't. And some people, there's been archaeologists that have said, oh, I saw it. I know where it is. It's under the mount that Jesus was crucified on, and Jesus' blood is dripping all the way down into the mercy seat, and all of those kind of stuff. I don't know, and I do have a chronological thing of where it was the last time we knew, but the point of that is it's still open for the Jewish people. They could still come to Christ. Just because they crucified Jesus doesn't mean that they can't still come to Christ. Okay, so he's giving that comfort there. He said, we have had good news preached to us just as they also had, but the word did not profit them. Hey, this is interesting. You know that the word, when it's given, okay, it profits. It always returns to it. But in this case, it's saying the word did not profit them. Why? Because it was not united or mixed with faith. Okay? So this is a real important thing. If I don't know if anybody's a foodie in here, somebody, you just got to go to okay, Penny, I'm seeing that they're the food elites. They have to go to the best restaurant in the city. They just can't go to McDonald's, It's important. But anyway, so let's just say you were one of those people and you studied the city of, let's call it Chicago, and you looked at the restaurants on the map. You memorized their menus. You kept the critiques that were out for those restaurants, and you talked to people that were there, and you did all of that stuff, but you never ate there. You never partook of that restaurant. That's kind of like those who study the Bible, carry the Bible, they talk about the Bible, but they never unite what they hear in faith, in living. We were talking about John MacArthur's church, and they were on TV. He was on TV this morning. They've gone through an awful lot. The governor in California took away their parking, first time in 25 years. They gave them this set of rules that no one could ever follow to come to worship. They wouldn't let them sing. They wouldn't let them read out of a hymnal. They wouldn't, all that stuff. But John MacArthur, Reverend MacArthur, he stood on God's word. And he says, we're supposed to worship, and we're going to worship. Now, he's not forcing anybody to come, so they had to have their level of comfort in doing that. But he stood with them. And then now they've gotten 6,000 people coming on Sundays again. 1,000 children came last week for started up the children's service and all of that. And so he trusted in God's word. That's That's faith. And faith is kind of defined as if you live by sight and not by faith, which the Bible tells us to live by faith. If you live by sight, you would never do that. You would never go against the governor. You would never do any of those things because there's a lot to fear. He could have very well been put in jail. He could have been fined. All those things. But he decided to live by faith. And he stood. I'm sure there was a lot of prayer involved and so forth. And that doesn't mean, it's right for everybody, but that is the example of faith. And in chapter 11, when we get there, we're going to see the list of people in biblical characters who lived by faith. And what was it that they actually did that helped you were walking by faith? Okay? And I've talked about the guy across Niagara Falls and, take that wheelbarrow across Niagara Falls on a tightrope, well then get in, Get in yourself. And if you're unwilling to get in, then it's just talk. We have to live by faith. And it's not all major things like, having a church come back or something like that, but it could be little things. It's cheating on your taxes, but I'm not really cheating. I'm not really cheating. I mean, everybody does that, and I just, so I shouldn't, I shouldn't worry about that. I can do it. I can get away with it. It's okay. Just little things. I shouldn't get mad at that person. I ought to love them. But my natural self says, no, they did you wrong. You need to get back at them or do so. So it's little things, it's big things, but that's what the Bible says consistently. Walk by faith and not by sight. When you walk by sight, what that really means is walking by your senses. That you're seeing what people said or you're hearing and things like that. You need to be walking by what the Bible says, okay? I guess another, I thought of a bunch of examples of this where you're not united by faith. So you studied for the Missouri driver's test, and you got the little booklet, okay? And you say to yourself, I'm never going to get a ticket when I drive. Why? Because I got the book here. So that's the book. No, you got to read what's in the book and then abide by the laws, and then maybe you won't get stopped, okay? But it's like carrying around the driver's manual and saying, I'm covered, okay? People carry around the Bible and say, I'm covered. That's not it. You're only getting part of the story. You're like a restaurateur that, they never ate there. They're skinny and they're they're not nourished, but they talk about that restaurant all the time. And that's the whole thing about the scriptures is we have to live that way. And so here is where he said to the Jews, he said they had the Bible, they had the Old Testament, they carried it along, and yet they didn't unite it by faith. I heard a story of a boxer. My son loves to watch boxing, and he watches all those. So when we're down there, we're usually watching it with him. And there was one boxer who, before he ever, when he got in the ring, he blessed himself. Okay, a lot of us were Catholic. Okay, and he blessed himself, and he won, everything. And someone came to him and they says, does that blessing yourself help? He said, well, yeah, if you're a good boxer. It's like, yeah, that's good, but you got to box, okay? You can't just bless yourself and assume that that's going to help you out. And so, or like a baseball, fan, love baseball, and you collect all the things, the baseballs and the cards and all of those kinds, but you never go to a baseball game, or you never play baseball, So that's kind of the story there, and it was the story of the Jews back then. They never combined their faith with Caleb and Joshua did, okay? And you'll see later, Joshua comes back 40 years later. He's an old man now. And, they say, well, you're going to go in now? You're older than that. I don't care. I'm going because I'm united by faith. to go in that land, and we're going to take care of business. And a lot of the other people, when they first tried to do that, they wouldn't do it. So let's continue. So and then in Psalms 95, it refers back to the Exodus in that, and when God said, "I swore in my wrath," God gets angry, right? I mean, the attributes of God, I think the things that when they say we're made in His image, I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with physical appearance or anything like that. I think emotions and the way He feels love and kindness and even wrath, even anger. Okay, we have anger, God has anger, and I think God made us that way so we can understand God better. And that's what we understand through the Scriptures. So, excuse me. So he goes on and he says, although His works were finished from the foundation of the world after the 6 days, for He has said somewhere, which is Genesis 2, concerning the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all His works. And again, in this passage, they shall not enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some, not everyone has come to the Lord, not everyone is entering His rest. It remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly already had the good news preached to them failed to enter because of disobedience. And if you see the word disobedience, you can also put next to it lack of faith or faithlessness or unfaith or whatever. Okay? That's really what it means. I don't really, to me personally, when I read, well, you need to obey God or you need to obey that, it has a harshness to it. It has a kind of a sense to it where there's no emotions involved, or there's no. It's really it's disbelief. Okay, and I go back to John chapter 6. I believe that when Jesus did some miraculous things, and everybody was excited, and they all came to Him, and they says, Jesus, what are the works of God? What can we do? What are the works that you want us to do? He said, I want you to believe. That's it. I mean, the whole purpose of our existence is, first of all, we must believe. You can't glorify God if you don't believe. And so our first thing is, do we believe God? Not just we believe in Him in some ominous way, but do we believe what He tells us? Do we believe His Word? And that's why you won't know unless you read the Word and what He really wants. So from that, he goes on to say that those that don't believe are not going to enter my rest. You're not going to go to heaven if you don't believe Him. If you carry around the Bible and you read it once in a while and you tell people about it in some way, but you don't live it, you don't walk in faith, then you're not going to heaven. I mean, that's simply the answer there. And of course, and I had someone even make comments about my last YouTube thing, because you're always going to get comments when you get a lot of people watching. And it talked about Christians, the new Christians or something, and there was a negative term about the fact that, all we have to do is sit back and rest. That's not what I was saying. And in fact, Christians are not passive. Christians are active. John MacArthur was active. He stood. He went through a lot, not really knowing what the answer is going to be. I mean, they could have just put him in jail. But he stood, and he went with it, and he said, you know what? It's kind of like, if I perish, I perish. Okay? So it goes on, therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those formerly had good news preached to them, they failed to enter because of disobedience. He again, and we talked about this, another thing you could circle, he again fixes a certain day. Today. Okay? That's God's day. Today is God's day. Tomorrow is the devil's day. All right? If God's calling on you, respond today. Now. If you hear, well, I'm going to be there tomorrow and I could do, then that's the devil talking to you. It's about tomorrow. So today is a very important word in the Scriptures, in the Old Testament. Today saying through David after such a long time, just as has been said before, again, Psalms 95, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And why does it say do not harden your hearts? Because that's the natural thing that will happen. If you really hear God speaking to you and you're not with him, you're not trusting in him, your natural instinct or inclination will be to harden your hearts. That the more you hear it, after a while, your conscience, as Paul says, will become seared, which you won't even hear it anymore, okay? Because it's been so many times. And I mean, there's been a lot of churches, we were at, and I remember one, and the preacher said the same thing every week, and I thought, well, you can kind of figure out another way of saying it, to help us and keep us inspired. But it was the same thing, so like you turn it off, and you don't hear it anymore. And that happens just naturally. But this is saying, today, if you hear his voice, today. Okay. And I called it a period of opportunity. We're just about done for today, unfortunately. Let me just read the last part. For if Joshua, and by the way, the name Joshua is the same as Jesus. Okay, that's the Greek version. And when we were over there, I had to read some scriptures, and we had some Jewish people that gave me their Bible, and it was Yeshua. And so and then I finally told him, can I say Jesus? And he said, okay. So Joshua had given them rest back then in the Exodus. He would not have spoken of another day. So there are people that think, well, I missed it, so it's over. No, he's not talking about just the Israelites. He's not talking about just getting in Canaan. He's talking about today, that we can enter that rest of God. He would not have spoken another day after that. So there does remain, and he called it a Sabbath rest for the people of God. At the end of our lives, when we go to heaven, we'll be in the ultimate Sabbath rest. Okay? Well, I mean, what are the characteristics about the Sabbath that God really wants? He wants us to quit paying attention to all the other stuff and paying attention to him. Not that we don't, but I found when I was working, I can't just keep thinking about God as I'm trying to get stuff done, okay? But at the end of the week, that's God's. That's all his. And it's good for us. It was good physically. It was good for the land to let it rest after 6 days. That's the cycle that God gave us. That's why Sunday's so important. That's why I wanted to come back and have Sunday school on Sunday, because this is the day we're supposed to really rest and focus on him. Okay. His rest has also, of him in himself, also rested from the works as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent. Let us make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will fall, though following the same example of disobedience. I'll finish with this. You've been on a lot of airplanes. Maybe you were a salesperson and you flew all the time, and maybe it's United, maybe it was Delta, maybe it was Southwest or something, and you're sitting there, and all of a sudden, coming over the loudspeaker, is the flight attendant saying, you'll notice all the exits we have over the wings, and one in the front, and two, and doing all this stuff, and then they would say, and your exit might be behind you. Well, you don't see anybody turning around and looking for that exit anymore. They're so used to hearing that they don't even pay attention. And he's saying, you may have heard the word, but pay attention, all the time. Pay attention to it. And that exit may be back there, and when things happen, you're not going to know what to do. You better figure it out now. That's what my little thing about memorizing Scripture. You don't have to memorize the whole Bible, but if you get some key scriptures, memorize them, because one day the storm's going to hit you, and you're not even going to have time to open up that Bible. Maybe a neighbor, maybe something's going to happen. You're not going to have time to go do that. That's like emergency procedures for flying. When I went to flight school, they actually put them on the back of the stalls in the bathrooms and everything. You had to memorize them, because when when you get a bird strike, okay, as they did on the Hudson, He didn't have time to go through all these checklists. He had to know what the emergencies were. And I think even more than that, Christians having the Bible, we had to have those key scriptures with us. Okay? And I'll give you some that I think are probably important ones. I don't have the Bible memorized, but I have some of them memorized so that when that time comes up, there, I'm going. I've got it. Okay? So, with that, we'll close there. But one of the things that I want to do with the class, and I don't know if I'll do it next week or whatever, but I keep telling you, and I'm sure John says it a lot, he says, you need to be a better disciple. You need to follow Christ. You need to walk in faith and all those kind of things. And a lot of times people I don't know what the next step is. I don't really, if you think of the word disciple, and then you think of the derivative discipline, okay? They're one and the same. In other words, there have to be disciplines that we follow that help us to be better disciples. And I'd like to kind of go through some of those with us in one class, and it's just arming ourselves a little bit better. Discipleship classes are no good having a big crowd of people and teaching discipleship. It's an intimate affair. It's something that people have to learn and have to commit themselves to the other little members of the class about what they're going to do and trust each other that they're going to do that. It's a time where you open up your hearts to some other people and you share things that you wouldn't ordinarily share with a big group. But I want to go through some of the disciplines, and maybe it'll help us, because sometimes I feel bad. I'm saying the same thing, and I know there are people, and you need to pray. Well, I don't even know how to pray. I don't know. I hear people pray. Joe comes and puts his arm around us and he prays and stuff like that, but I don't know what prayer means for me. What do I really do? Because I want to grow closer to God, I must start looking at the disciplines. If I think about, and I promise I'll close after this, when I think about if you want to play the piano, let's say as one example, and you're younger and you want to take piano lessons, okay? There are certain disciplines that you have to go through, okay? You have to have a time of the day that you're going to practice. You have to have the quiet time of that day so you can practice. You have to know exercises, and you have to go through exercises. You have to have someone that can teach you, or someone that you could look up to. Maybe you go to concerts. Maybe you do those kind of things. Any of those kind of examples can be the Christian walk. Is you have to have those things. And just to ask people to be a better disciple doesn't help. And so I just kind of want to get in between what it takes to be a disciple of Christ and calling out that you need to be. There's something in between there. Certain disciplines of being a disciplined disciple. Okay? All right, so with that, I'll close.